I just want to welcome everyone to this afternoon's meeting, the talk by Lionel Sims about the meaning of Avebury and Stonehenge ancient monuments. My name is Sarah Miller, and I'm going to be chairing the meeting today. I've noticed that quite a few people have signed in, as it were, on the chat. It'd be really nice if everyone who's on the call today can sign in on the chat and say your name and where you are, as the meeting is going to be recorded and the chat will be a record of who's participated today. A little bit about me. I've known Lionel Sims for more than 30 years. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not an expert on the topic that's being talked about today. My interest in these issues was really first sparked as a socialist activist, listening to debates and meetings about the origins of women's oppression at events such as the Marxism annual festival organised by the Socialist Workers' Party, which I'm a member of. And those discussions to me were so important about whether or not these issues, whether or not women's oppression is something that's inevitable, or whether humans once organised society differently in a more egalitarian way. And as you know, Lionel has been doing the annual walk and talk around the Ivory Monuments at the summer solstice. And I've been joining in on those for the past 9 years. And I found it absolutely fascinating and inspiring, not only to kind of be taken back to think about how ancient people lived, but also because those issues are relevant, they're very relevant to today, to the struggles that we're still fighting today for a world that's free of oppression and exploitation. This year, as we know, the Avebury talk has not been, the Avebury walk has not been possible. For two reasons, because of the pandemic, and also because, as we know, Lionel is ill with cancer and is undergoing chemotherapy. And we thought that this online meeting is a way both to bring together those of us who are inspired and interested in these matters and the subject of the talk, and hopefully some people who are new to the ideas are on the call today as well, and also for us to express our solidarity and support and love for Lionel. I just want to say thank you to all the people who've helped to organise the meeting, in particular to Daniela, Lionel's daughter, to Pete and Vicky, who've done a lot of the admin, and to Ashok, who's very ably helping with the technological side of things. Okay, I'm going to move on just to say a few points about how the meeting will run. I'm going to hand over to Lionel in a second, who will introduce the talk, which has been pre-recorded. The whole thing is going to be on record and put up on YouTube. So if you don't want to be, if you want to speak at the meeting but you don't want to be seen, then you need to switch your video off. We're going to be having some time afterwards, maybe about half an hour or so, for questions and discussion. If people want to ask questions, I urge you to use the chat facility to do that. So post up your question in the chat. And we're going to be using the raised hand, raising your virtual hand, in order to choose who to speak. Yeah, that's it really from me. I'm going to hand over now to Lionel.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Sarah, thank you for those lovely words. And thank you to everyone for coming. I'm noticing there are 68 of us who are now online, which is wonderful, because this whole idea started with 2 or 3 people talking in a shed a few months ago, and we thought this would be a good idea. Usually this time of year, I'm washing my socks after returning from the camp at Avebury. Now, of course, we can't do this year because of the pandemic, but there is another reason, and that is some of us felt, quite a few of us felt, that the Avebury camp had lost its way. And we have substantial criticisms of the way in which that camp is being run. Now, this might seem irrelevant, but the point is, in our culture, in our society, it's very easy to lose your way, to lose the principles by which you started something. And my approach to prehistory has been very different from the standard archaeological theory of the past. And I come from an anthropology background in which we celebrate traditional cultures, especially hunter-gathering cultures, for their egalitarianism. And therefore, my approach to the past has come with this anthropological emphasis. And I hope you've had an inkling of that. I'm sure some of you have, because I've recognised the names, which is lovely to see people from the past, from the University of East London. It's lovely to see you all. Thank you for coming. But the approach that I'm going to be taking, that you'll hear in the pre-recorded talk, it's 1 hour and 25 minutes. So sit back, relax, enjoy the talk, and store up all those criticisms and observations that you want to throw at me, because I'll love to hear them after the talk. Okay? So over to you, Ashok. Everyone, I'm Lionel Sims. I'm giving a talk today about Stonehenge and Avebury, and some context and background on why I'm going to be talking about Stonehenge and Avebury. So the bulk of the talk has been recorded, so I'm about to show you that recorded part of the talk in a moment. Okay, so here we go. And the title of the talk, as you'll see on the screen now, is The Solarization of the Moon, Interpreting the Stonehenge and Avebury Monuments. I've also put up there my email address, and also on there is a web page address, www.academia.edu/sims, because up on that web page you'll find all of my scientific papers, which are the background for this talk. Now, the thing is, why am I talking about the Stonehenge and the Avebury monuments? Because it's not as obvious as it may appear, because of course many people are intrinsically attracted to Stonehenge and Avebury, whereas, to be frank, I never was intrinsically attracted to Stonehenge and Avebury. I used it as a certain device to win an argument which previously I had lost within the Socialist Workers' Party in particular, and probably the left in general. I lost an argument defending Frederick Engels, who argued that humans are a revolutionary species, and that our foundation, our beginnings, came through a radical break with animality. And that this was achieved under the leadership of women. And women, in solidarity with their brothers in matrilineal clans, had managed to carve out a completely new way of organising themselves. And this new way was one in which women exist in two modes and men exist in two modes. Women with their sisters through a common line of mothers therefore identify not just one or two sisters, but hundreds, if not thousands of sisters who identify a common line of descent through a line of mothers, as do their brothers identify themselves along the same matrilineal line of descent. And that the cultural world at the beginning, not now, but in the beginning, by which, by the way, we mean in the Paleolithic in Africa 200,000 years ago, that this is all established within paleoanthropology. All of this data that I'm now presenting to you is established data within paleoanthropology. And this argument works very well. It's a theory, it's a model of the origins of human culture. And I took these insights and these theories into the left, because also I was not just a lecturer at the University of London, I was also a member of the Socialist Workers' Party. So I just thought, this is a gift. This is a gift to the left. And the Socialist Workers' Party would forearm itself with the knowledge of this new paleo-anthropological model of the origins of human culture. Well, I was much surprised to find out that practically everyone disagreed with me. And they were very angry with me. And the reason they were angry was they heard my arguments as if I was collapsing into radical feminism, and that I was arguing that women are just antagonistic towards men, and that when they rule, they oppress men. This was not the argument at all. I thought I made it abundantly clear that this wasn't the argument, but clearly I failed. And it all came to a culmination in a debate that was organised by the party, in which Duncan Hannis, a good comrade, a good man, argued against me on the basis of, from my point of view, fallacious arguments. And so there was this massive debate, which I held my own, but I didn't convince the majority of people in the conference. So the issue really is, what is this theory? And the theory is very unusual. It is very specific. A theory that is unusual and very detailed should be easy to refute. It's theories that are abstract and general that are difficult to test. But this theory is not difficult to refute. And this is the challenge that I presented to people at the conference. And this theory argues that closely bonded women with the backing of their brothers, this is the crucial bit of the argument, with the backing of their brothers, that they secluded themselves at dark moon, collectively secluded themselves from their husbands, and their husbands were only welcome in their own group of sisters and mothers and other brothers. So the cultural world begun by our ancestors in Africa 200,000 years ago is a cultural world divided into two bits: matrilineal clan A, matrilineal clan B. And in each of these clans, there are sisters, brothers, and mothers. And there could be hundreds of them, even thousands of them. And that therefore, in the sacred half of the month, when women secluded themselves, their husbands had disappeared into their own group of sisters and brothers. And this was a dark moon. But from dark moon to full moon, hunting, big game, logistical hunting was conducted in Africa, and then later on all around the world, in Africa, between the period of dark moon and full moon. And then by the light of full moon, the hunt was brought to a culmination, and hunted game would be brought back to the home base, where the sisters, brothers, and mothers were then located in their own matrilineal clans. Once the hunted game had been surrendered back into the home base, then marital relations could resume, because then women in each clan were being provisioned by the men in the other clan. This is the point. Marriage only takes place between clans. So if a man wants to visit his wife, it's very simple. He leaves his longhouse, he leaves his matrilineal clan, and he goes to visit his sweetheart in the other clan. And standing all around his sweetheart are tens of sisters, tens of brothers. Therefore, the man has to be respectful. The man has to be polite. If he's not, a woman is not on her own to deal with a husband who is jealous and possibly not at all respectful. This is a decisive break with animality. Of course, it didn't happen overnight. Of course, it wasn't a sudden moment of clarification. Of course, this evolved over thousands of years, and there are good ways of explaining how that slow process would have developed between 500,000 years ago and 200,000 years ago. And there's plenty of literature of high scientific quality which explains all of that. But we've not got time for that today. All I'm asking you to notice is that this theory argues that periods of aggregation and then separation follow a lunar logic, in which dark moon, women seclude themselves from their husbands, they join up with their sisters and brothers, and then during the waxing period of the lunar month, the waxing half of the month, by full moon, hunting had been successfully completed. And by the way, it was always successful, because there was mass big game plenty during the Paleolithic. And that's what this theory suggests to us, that after full moon, marital relations could begin again. From our point of view, that's all that we need to know to be able to then check out what happened afterwards. Because my theory, the whole approach that I was trying to take was that there must be a time when that system collapsed. And to to support the argument and confirm the argument, I decided, once I lost the argument within the SWP, that I would have to carry out some sort of research to strengthen this argument. And so I decided that we want prehistory, we want evidence from prehistory. Where is the place in prehistory where there might be lots of evidence to be able to test this argument? And then I thought, well, Stonehenge is the most studied part of prehistory. So therefore, if we go and look at Stonehenge, there should be some evidence of a turning point in history when this lunar logic to hunter-gatherers was displaced by some other logic once hunter-gathering was no longer a viable option for survival. So that's the context, that's the background of why I then started to study Stonehenge. So I went to University College London. I did another degree at University College London. I met all the archaeologists and anthropologists there and started studying. I came completely unexpectedly to make a number of findings. And then for the last 20 years or so, I've been having a lot of fun writing scientific papers, studying the details of Stonehenge. Well, here you see a picture of Stonehenge. You'll see that it's a familiar site, probably to you, in which we have these large sarsen stones in an outer circle. And we all think we know, especially the 15 or 30,000 of us who go there every summer solstice, we all think we know that it's aligned on summer solstice sunrise, as this picture that you now see purports to be. You'll see there the summer solstice sun rising over the hillstone when you're standing somewhere near the centre inside the monument. And this is a very old argument. It was first of all made clearly by William Stukeley in 1725, and it's been repeated ever since by a motley crew of archaeoastronomers and archaeologists. But actually, it's not true, okay? Because if you do stand at the centre of Stonehenge, if you can find it, because it's not marked, and it never has been marked in the entire history of Stonehenge, there never has been a stone or a post that precisely marks the centre. But if we were standing at the centre, and if we had a sighting device, and if we chose the correct eye, left or right eye, therefore, if you aligned on the centre of the top of the hillstone from the centre, you'll see there from that diagram that the summer solstice sun rises 3 solar diameters to the left of the hillstone. So it's not true. It doesn't align with the summer solstice sunrise. It is inaccurate. Many archaeologists aren't bothered about this because they say, well, they were just howling barbarians. This was the quote from Richard Atkinson, a famous professor of archaeology. And anthropologists do not accept that hunter-gatherers or anyone who is a human is a howling barbarian, with the implication that their savagery or their weak intellectual abilities wouldn't allow them to make an accurate alignment on the summer solstice sunrise. That's not the case at all. So now I'm going to ask you all to do a little exercise in this talk. I'd like you to please extend your arm and raise one finger, and then close one eye and align that one eye with the top of your finger on any bit of a wall in the room that you're presently in. So are you all doing that? Extend your arm, raise one finger, close one eye, and align on some part of the room that you're in, and then change your eye, your left or your right eye. And you should notice a sudden shift in the alignment that took place. Okay, it's called a parallax error within astronomy. So if you look now at the picture on the PowerPoint there, you'll see that if an observer is standing near the centre of Stonehenge, and then if you do that, if you close one eye and raise your finger, and then look through any of the gaps, which can act as your finger looking through those gaps at Stonehenge, you could make Stonehenge do any astronomy you want. Basically, you need a back sight, you need a precise way to focus a particular eye to be able to sustain any claim that there is an alignment taking place in the architecture at Stonehenge. And of course, English Heritage, now called Historic England, do just this in their publicity. in which they will get the sun to do anything they want to be able to sell and prosper in using Stonehenge as a tourist monument, which they do very well and make a lot of money. But actually, in archaeoastronomy, the specific discipline that studies this is not a viable claim to make. And what we've got to do is we've got to look, and we've got to adopt an anthropological perspective, namely build up all the details of the properties of this monument and then work out from those details whether it could justify a claim for an alignment. And here we've got a picture. It's a bit vague in places, but my apologies, it's the only picture I've got that shows this clearly. You'll see that the approach to Stonehenge, there is an avenue approaching, and it's coming uphill towards Stonehenge, and that avenue in the diagram you see now is going towards the northeast. So if you come along that avenue and approach Stonehenge, you're going uphill and you're looking to the southwest. You're looking towards Stonehenge. So therefore, first point, we approach Stonehenge as the builders intended you to approach Stonehenge, namely moving, I'm moving the cursor now along the avenue, and we're walking towards Stonehenge and we're looking to the southwest. Okay. And now, this would be the view from above, looking towards the southwest through Stonehenge. And this is an artist's impression of Stonehenge when it was complete, which is not bad. There's a few errors in it, but it's not bad. And you'll notice, first of all, that the entrance to Stonehenge is this gap here. This gap is twice the gap compared to any other gap between the stones. That is stone number 1. That is stone number 30. Therefore, there were 30 stones in the outer ring at Stonehenge. However, there's an issue here, because that stone there is called stone number 11 by the archaeologists. It was never that large. It was half the height, half the width, and half the depth of all of the other stones. Therefore, the outer ring of stones didn't have 30 stones. It had 29.5 stones. Well, that's a very unusual number for prehistory, we might think. But now look inside, there's another circle inside there, and that was the blue stones. These big stones are called sarsens, and there's inner circle of stones, they're called blue stones. And there were 59 blue stones. Well, listen carefully, 59 stones is 30 plus 29. Well, we've got 30 stones in the outer ring, but actually they're 29.5, and 59 stones is 30 and 29, and the average of 30 and 29 is, of course, 29.5. Now, what does this mean? It means that these are lunar numbers. Notice, immediately I'm finding a connection in terms of lunar properties between the Paleolithic hunter-gatherers in that theory of dark moon to full moon alternation. Now I'm finding lunar numbers in Stonehenge. And 29.5 is the average length of the synodic month, which is the month from one full moon to the next full moon, or one dark moon to the next dark moon. One month will have 30 days in it, the next month will have 29, the next month 30 days, the next month 29, and on average 29.5 days are in each month. Inside the circle there is this arc, horseshoe-shaped arc of other blue stones. There were 19 blue stones in that arc. As we're going to see later, 19 is also a lunar number. And then we have these 5 trilithons here, okay, with the grand trilithons, the biggest stones there, that's called the grand trilithon, that are surrounding this central arc, and laying on the ground was a green stone. It's called the altar stone by the archaeologists. So you'll notice there's a symmetrical design in the monument. Here's the axis. I'm moving the cursor along the axis, which, remember, is looking to the southwest. We're looking to the southwest there. Notice also that these trilithons here, they are pinched inwards. They're pointing to a point where these lines will converge at a certain place. So what have we got? The monument is saying, I've got 2 circles, I've got 2 arcs. I am double. That's what the monument is saying. I am twofold. There's 2 circles, there's 2 arcs. the monument is symmetrical. It has an axis. It has an entrance. The centre is not marked. There was no stone, no post ever put at the centre of Stonehenge. That the Trilithons are staggered in height. They are lowest there, and they get bigger and bigger towards the Grand Trilithon just there. Now look at the next bit. The lintel that stood on top of the Grand Trilithon, its face was tipped forward. It wasn't squared off. It wasn't vertical. It was designed to be tipped forward. Okay, that's on the Grand Trilithon lintel. And you'll see here, this is stone 54 here, and this is lintel number 55. You'll see there that its face was also pointing outwards, was also tipped forward. This is a property of certain lintels at Stonehenge. And here we got the artist, same artist, amazingly, has now drawn stone 11 correctly at half the height, half the width, and half of all of the other stones. And here we see the Grand Trilithon lintel step forwards. And now notice, here are the two Trilithons aligned to a point where they will converge and meet. And now, if you also add to it the tip forward lintel on top of stone 55 and 56, the Grand Trilithon, all these lines all converge at one point. They all meet at one point, and they all converge here on the hill stone, which stands outside the monument. Here is the outer circle of stones, the Sarsens there. Here is the entrance coming into Stonehenge, and here's the hill stone right nearly at the end of the avenue. And you'll see that the hill stone has two straight sides, which if the hill stone wasn't heeling over, they would be vertical straight sides to them. So now the monument is saying, I am double, I am this, and you need to look at me from the hill stone, because it's from the hill stone that you see all these properties clearly. So there's the hill stone, here's the picture here, and these are the properties that we've found so far. So one of my students, John MacDonald, thought my diagrams were useless when I was giving lectures at the university on this. So as a project for his own PhD, he started designing a computer model of Stonehenge. And here we see some versions of his model. The turf is stripped off. We're in chalk country in the Salisbury Plain area. We know that they stripped the chalk off, so it would have been a gleaming white avenue and a gleaming white enclosure within which the monument was built. As we come down to the level, standing level on the avenue, and you'll see here that we're walking uphill. Most people think Stonehenge was built on level ground. It's not. It's built on the side of a hill, and we are walking upwards towards Stonehenge, approaching the hill stone. You will notice now that from this angle, instead of Stonehenge being full of gaps, now it acts as an obscuration device. It looks like a solid wall of stone, except for a lower window and an upper window. And that either side of the hill stone, we will be able to see these lower and upper windows. And that's a good place to view this property. Now, all of this was all discovered, not by me, by John North, a professor of the history of astronomy, very talented man. And he wrote a wonderful book called Stonehenge, Neolithic Man and the Cosmos. And he showed that this obscuration effect only worked from the northeast going towards the southwest. It doesn't work in the reverse direction from the southwest to the northeast. So this obscuration effect was found by John North, and I'm one of the few people who celebrate John North's research. Most archaeoastronomers won't have anything to do with him for weird reasons. Now, here's a Photoshop rendition of Stonehenge with its lower window and its upper window. And now we're going to see, why did the monument builders design a monument which looks like, when you're approaching it in the correct way from the avenue up to the hill stone, why does it look like a solid wall of stone except for these lower and upper windows? because these lower and upper windows, they only open up to the sky behind them, nothing else, just open up to the sky. Here you'll see John North's diagrams. This is from his book. He very kindly sent them to me to be able to do these sorts of presentations. When you stand on the right-hand side of the hillstone, it opens up this lower window very clearly. You'll see that the upper window is clipped and quite difficult to see from the right-hand side of the hillstone. But when you're on the left-hand side of the hillstone, you'll see that it closes up the lower window a bit, but opens up the upper window, and it's a bit clearer to see this upper window there. It's still quite cryptic, but nevertheless, from the left-hand side of the hillstone, we see the upper window. From the right-hand side of the hillstone, we see the lower window clearly. And these are John North's discovery. It so happens that these windows fit something the sun does every winter and something the moon does every 19 years. Now remember the number 19. 19 was the number of bluestones within the inner arc within Stonehenge. And these oscillations in the moon's horizon range limits oscillate according to this 19-year cycle. So now we've got a third lunar number within the properties at Stonehenge. So every year, and by the way, the monument still does this at winter solstice. So all of us who go there at summer solstice, yes, it's a clever idea to go at summer solstice, but please remember the monument builders designed the monument to be there at winter solstice, not summer solstice. They had another monument for that, and that's called Durrington Walls. But every winter, the winter sun does this. It sets in the lower window. Now remember, we're also looking uphill still, because Stonehenge is built on the side of a hill. So as we walk from the hillstone towards the centre of Stonehenge, and possibly to go into the centre of Stonehenge, our eye is going up while the sun is going down. And as long as we follow a sedate ritual pace, the way in which our eye is going up as we walk uphill, it exactly counterbalances the rate of descent of the sun as it is setting. And you hold time still for about 7 to 10 minutes, as long as you're walking slowly and sedately. It appears that the sun has stopped descending. These monument builders are the masters of time. They can stop time turning in the way in which they design their monuments in this way, so that your eye is going up as you are walking towards the monument as the sun is going down. So they are the masters of time. They're showing off with their knowledge of what happens in the sky, and they've built this property into the monument itself. That happens every year. It's winter solstice sunset. Every 19 years, for a period of about a year either side of this point in the 19-year cycle, the moon does this. The moon sets in the upper window. You'll notice it's a sliver of the moon. It is not the full orb of the moon, you'll notice. And this monument does this every 19 years. So everything I've said so far was discovered by John North. I learnt I knew no astronomy when I started this research. I learnt all my astronomy from John North. And so therefore, everything I've said so far is accountable to John North. But I asked a question that John North didn't ask. And I corresponded with him about it because I was rather surprised. I asked the question, what happens when the moon is in the upper window and the sun is in the lower window? Because clearly the monument says, I am double. Well, if the monument is double, and if we've got windows, one of which is on the sun and one of which is on the moon, then it's saying, I am double with what's in the sky. And the main bodies in the sky are the sun and the moon. So my research began when I asked the question John North didn't ask. What happens when the moon and the sun are both in their windows at the same time? So this is where I started seriously learning astronomy. It's called positional astronomy, where you have to use various formula. But actually, to be honest, you don't need any of the formula, because it's pretty obvious what happens. That if the moon is in the upper window and the sun is in the lower window, then that means the sun is illuminating the other side of the moon that we can't see, because they are in line. Imagine a line with the Earth, then the moon, and then the sun on the other side of the moon. And then the sun is illuminating what to us is the dark side of the moon. Okay, and we therefore will not see the moon when they are aligned. And that's what's happening here at the monument. It means that when the moon is in the upper window and the sun is in the lower window, then the moon that will be in the upper window will be dark moon. Now, when I learned this in my research, I couldn't stop laughing, because I then knew that I had to go to astronomy meetings and say that this world-renowned monument was aligned on a moon that could not be observed, that it was dark moon. But nevertheless, in anthropology, we are quite used to dealing with this sort of symbolism, because this symbolism means this monument is designed to conduct a ritual at the start of the longest, darkest night. And the longest, darkest night, if you conduct a ritual at this time, it is out of the darkest, darkest, darkest night that magic can evolve. That ritual sacred power is the greatest when something emerges out of nothing. And all myths, all rituals are about these deepest secrets. We call them like the Greek mysteries, the Eleusinian mysteries. They are the same thing. They're all about something emerging out of darkness. So John North was rather surprised that I came up with this argument, but nevertheless, he was very supportive, a very kind and supportive man. And here he is. Here's John North. As I say, most people don't take enough attention to the work that he does. Anyway, however, there's a trick to this, because the challenges that I heard and received were pretty straightforward. They were saying, Lionel, how can you possibly build a monument which is aligned on something you can't see? And the answer is very simple. Well, no, it's not very simple. It's about how the moon would have been tracked within that upper window up there. So this is the difficult bit. So let's hope I can explain it properly for everyone. When the moon is going round the Earth, it takes 27.3 days to circle the Earth. And as it circles the Earth, we would see this on the horizon as a movement. If we're looking to the west, this would be seen as a movement in which the range of the moon's horizon, rise and set positions are alternating between an extreme on the left and an extreme on the right. And when the moon reappears at the place when you first saw it and in its extreme left horizon position, it would then have circled the Earth in those 27.3 days that it takes for the moon to go around the Earth. And this is called the sidereal cycle of the moon. It reappears in the same place at the sky that it was 27.3 days before. However, as the moon is circling the Earth is also circling the sun. And it takes another 2.2 days for the Earth to move round the sun, for the moon's phase to reappear the position it was when you started observing the moon in its first horizon position. So when you're watching through that upper window, the moon, first of all being there, then disappearing for 27.3 days, and then coming back there, that time period of 27.3 days has not taken into account the Earth's movement around the sun. So instead, the moon that you'll see next in the upper window will be the lunar phase 2.2 days before the lunar phase you saw when you first saw the moon in that upper window. This is what this next diagram is all about. This next diagram was produced by a man called Morrison. He's Professor of Astronomy at Greenwich Observatory, or was. So my sources are impeccable, and you'll see here and the moon that we see at Stonehenge is called the southern minor standstill of the moon, and that's this lower half of the diagram here. So I showed you full moon, and I've now got the cursor on full moon just there. But the moon, the next moon that will appear in the upper window will be waning crescent moon there, but the moon that we see after full moon normally, here we see, sorry, that's waxing crescent moon there, not waning, sorry, which is nearly full but not quite full. Then we see waxing crescent moon, which is even less full. Then we see first quarter moon. Then we see just before first quarter moon. And then we see waxing crescent moon and a very slim sliver there of waxing crescent moon. And then finally we see dark moon just there. Now, the point is those moon's phases have gone backwards. They go in reverse, okay? If we really saw the moon as we normally see it up in the sky, which follows a 29.5 day alternation, we would begin with, first of all, with dark moon, then we'd see waxing crescent moon, then we'd see the moon getting fatter, then we'd see first quarter moon, and then we'd see waxing, and now it's fat, it's called gibbous moon, and then waxing crescent moon, and then full moon. But they appear in this sequence, the reverse sequence in that upper window. Now, therefore, when I'm challenged on how can you possibly align on dark moon, the answer is very simple, you don't. But what you see is a whole series of moons in the upper window which are going backwards, which are going in reverse. This is called, I call this the solarization of a reversed moon. Now, why is this important? This is important because what they're doing in these upper windows is now having a moon that happens every 19 years, not every month, and a moon that not only happens every 19 years, a moon that goes into reverse. This is the very opposite of the moon that we see in the sky. The moon we see in the sky, not through a monument, is the monthly moon, and this monthly moon goes from dark moon to full moon and then round to dark moon again. That's the moon that we're all familiar with. But this moon happens every 19 years. It's spread over 27.3 days of a cycle, and it goes backwards. If you wanted a lunar ritual to undermine an earlier Paleolithic lunar ritual, which is a monthly cycle of dark and alternating full moons, you couldn't have a more perfect system than one like this, built at Stonehenge, which reverses this woman's moon, the sisters of the Paleolithic, and changes it into a quite different moon, which is far more complicated and is a reversal of the moon that we see in the sky. Stonehenge, and in fact most of the monuments of the Neolithic, Stonehenge and Avebury, and I'll be talking next about Avebury, these monuments are aligned on this moon that happens every 19 years and goes backwards.
Okay, we're now going to move on to the Avebury Monument Complex. Now, one reason for doing this is that when I started going to conferences, academic conferences, and talking about Stonehenge, I was astonished to receive a supposed refutation that Stonehenge was just one monument and therefore it might just be a peculiarity for the characteristics that I was finding researching at Stonehenge. Now, there is a sort of sense in this, but also there is a nonsense in it, because Stonehenge is the pinnacle of monument construction in the Neolithic, possibly in the world. So to say that it is of no consequence because it's only one monument complex is really pushing an argument beyond credibility. But nevertheless, in academia, when you're at a conference, you mustn't lose your temper, you've got to keep smiling, and you've got to carry on talking as if everyone's friends, which is actually nothing like the case. But anyway, I did this. I did what they were asking. I went to another monument complex, which is the Ivory Monument Complex. And now you can see a map, a very good map drawing of the Ivory Monument Complex, which was done in the 19th century. And I just have to explain this to you so that you understand the layout of the monument and the landscape that it is in. It is nothing like Stonehenge. We have got, however, a great big stone circle inside the Avebury Henge, which is an enormous ditch. I'm moving the cursor around where the ditch is, an internal ditch and an external bank. And inside that, about 99 or 100 stones in a great circle. And there were two inner circles within that, a northern one and a southern one. And there were central structures within inside these two inner circles. But what we've also got is two enormous avenues. The one here on the left is called Beckhampton Avenue, and the one here on the right is called West Kennet Avenue. And the West Kennet Avenue went to terminate at a structure called the Sanctuary, which I'll show you a picture of, a recreation of later on. Here at the start of the Beckhampton Avenue, this was a beautiful spot in the Wiltshire landscape called Fox Covert. And so they've got these two avenues here. And then in addition to this, we also have the largest man-made structure in prehistory in Europe, which is Silbury Hill, and I'll show you a photograph of that. It is a flat-topped conical pyramid of chalk, and also a massive wooden structure called the West Kennet Palisades. And you can see these numbers here, 1 for the West Kennet Palisades, 2 for Silbury Hill, 3 for Fox Covert, and then Beckhampton Avenue, 5 where the River Winterbourne undercuts Beckhampton Avenue, then the Avebury Henge, then West Kennet Avenue, and then the Sanctuary, etc. But notice something very, very odd about this arrangement. These structures are built in part of the landscape which are separated one from the other by intervening hills. This is called Folly Hill, this is called Waden Hill, and here we've got the scarp here of the Marlborough Downs. And Silbury Hill is located in this space here between these two hills, so that when you walk along the avenues, for most of the time, you can't see Silbury Hill at all. This is very odd, because in archaeology, the main theory of where monuments are constructed is they're constructed on flat level plains, and it's called central place theory, which is therefore that you're bragging about these enormous structures you're building and putting them all together in a central plaza type complex, celebrating the power of your display. That's the normal theory within archaeology. Nothing like that is going on here at Avebury at all. It is true you can see Silbury Hill from the start here at Fox Covert. You can see Silbury Hill there, but as you walk along Beckhampton Avenue, you go behind Folly Hill just here and you can't see Silbury Hill. You carry along Beckhampton Avenue here and you come to a river, the River Winterbourne. Pay attention, you're crossing a river. That should indicate something to you. But when you cross this river, it's called the River Winterbourne, by the way, because in the summer it doesn't exist because it's chalk country. But in the winter, during the rains, the water table rises and the river reappears, hence its name, the River Winterbourne. And then you can see Silbury Hill just as you're crossing the river, or what would have then been a marsh in prehistory, because now it's been drained and a bridge has been built at this place. And now you carry on along and as you carry along Beckhampton Avenue, Waden Hill here gets in the way of, and then as soon as you get inside Avebury Henge, most of the time you can't see Silbury Hill, except from one place at the centre of the southern inner circle. And then when you leave it and go along West Kennet Avenue, again you can't see Silbury Hill because it's behind Waden Hill. And you carry on, you can't see Silbury Hill at all until you come out at the Sanctuary, and then you can re-see Silbury Hill now in the west. And when you get down to the West Kennet Palisades, then you can see Silbury Hill from one part of its complicated structure. So notice, for 70 to 80% of the route through the avenues and through the Henge, you cannot see Silbury Hill. but in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 places, very precisely located, very precisely focused, you can see a bit of Silbury Hill. This is a very, very unusual arrangement. And when I first started my research, to be frank with you, it wasn't at Stonehenge because it costs a lot of money to get in there. It was at Avebury. And I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk all along these avenues and I'm going to carefully note what I see and what I feel when I walk along these avenues and when I'm in Avebury, Henge, and at the places of these other structures, because these are what we would say in anthropology and in archaeology. These are prescribed views. The people who built these monuments intended you to see them in their combination in the way they had designed the monuments. It's pretty straightforward. So I thought I'd walk the monuments in the way that the monument builders wanted me to. I was astonished during my reading to realize no one had ever done this at all. No one commented on it in archaeology. So I thought, well, okay, I'll do my best and I'll research my findings and see what I've got. Well, here's the Avebury Henge. You see its external bank and its internal ditch. If you've never been there, I recommend you pay a visit because it's an astonishing achievement of prehistory. They only had bone and wood and stone to build their structures. And this is enormous, absolutely enormous. It's actually silted up now, the ditch. And if you'll see in any of the gazettas of the monuments, you'll see pictures of when the archaeologists were digging out the structure to find its original form. Very, very large structure. And here you see the remnants of the southern inner circle. And from this place in the southern inner circle, you can see a little blip, a little cropped top terrace of Silbury Hill from this structure. Now, the reason why you can see it there is running through the center of the monument, there is a ridge, and the land to the west falls away and the land to the east falls away. So as you're walking around the big circle, you're alternately going up, 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 and then down, 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 up, 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 and then down, down, down. This central ridge, the two inner circles are placed on the central ridge. But in the northern inner circle, there's a structure called the Cove, which stops you seeing Silbury Hill. Whereas in the southern inner circle, there's a structure called the obelisk and the D feature, small square arrangement of small red stones, red when wet in the winter. And from that position, you can see Silbury Hill, or rather just the cropped top of it. So that's Avebury Circle. Now, John North, again, we're back to John North. For me, John North is the turning point in interpreting Neolithic monuments in Britain. And again, in his book, it published in 1996, he shows that the arrangement of that's the northern inner circle, that's the southern inner circle, and this was an oak complex circle just to the east side of the northern inner circle. And he shows that as you walk round these outer stones of the grand circle at Avebury, it's like they're 99 hill stones. Remember the one hill stone at Stonehenge? And you're supposed to stand at the hill stone and look to the center of the monument. Well, John North shows that if you stand at these outlying stones, they allow you and they prescribe to you certain views of the horizon. And he shows that the main views at Avebury are a view on the winter solstice sunset, the same as at Stonehenge, and they're on the southern major standstill. The southern major standstill is 9 years after the southern minor standstill, which you have at Stonehenge. Here, the axial alignment at the Avebury is on the major standstill 9 years later. This is a clue, because if there's a 9-year alternation in the lunar symbolism between Stonehenge and Avebury, that means they were alternating between each other as a way in which to mutually observe each other's main rituals. So it's a connection. Avebury is 20 miles north as the crow flies from Stonehenge. There was clearly interaction between the Avebury monument builders, who were separate and different from the Stonehenge monument builders. And here we can see the trace of this in the way that their lunar symbolism was the 19-year alternation in the major standstill compared to the 19-year alternation in the minor standstill. And here we've got a graph which shows you the horizon positions. Here is the northern major standstill. Here is the southern major standstill. And this is the extreme southwest of the horizon. Whereas at Stonehenge, we have the southern minor standstill. And this is the angle that we find on the horizon for the southern minor standstill. A very simple rule of thumb is that the southern minor standstill is 30 degrees south of west, whereas the southern major standstill is 50 degrees south of west, whereas the solstice is 40 degrees south of west. Roughly, they're the numbers to keep in your mind if you want to do any field work yourself. So here we are, we're back to Avebury, and remember what we're doing. We're going to be talking about the different views that we can see as we are imagining ourselves moving along the Beckhampton Avenue into the Avebury Henge, along West Kennet Avenue, and then to the sanctuary. And what else will we see? Well, here's the reconstructed part of the West Kennet Avenue. And you can see that these are parallel paired rows of stones. And we're looking towards Avebury Henge. See that tree there? That's a chestnut tree. And that's on the edge of the Avebury Henge, which is out of sight when we're walking along West Kennet Avenue. By the way, they walked on the outside of the stones, not between the stones. And that allowed them to see views across the avenues in the way in which each stones were paired, either opposites or diagonals or longitudinally along the length of the avenue. The stones are so arranged, you can see them here. Look, the stone tops coincide with the background horizon. Do you see that? They all intersect with the horizon. And on those points of the horizon, the sun and the moon can be seen rising and setting. So here we are, West Kennet Avenue. That's where we're looking. We were just there, that part of the avenue there in that previous slide. And here's Silbury Hill. Now, it is a truly colossal monument. It is enormous. Notice it's not just conical. It's not just got a flat top there, okay? So it's a flat, but it also has a top terrace, okay? And it's only that top terrace that you see in the prescribed views as you're going round the monuments. Now, I've argued, and you can see this in my academia.edu/sims papers, I've argued that that top terrace is a result of them scraping off the turf every 9 or 19 years to reveal a gleaming white face on that top terrace of Silbury Hill. And then when you're walking along the avenues, which is 3 to 5 kilometers away from this structure, that's the top bit of the Silbury Hill that you will see peeping over the horizon when you're walking along those avenues. So, and now we've got the West Kennet Palisades, which is the structure here built around this part of the River Kennet. And here is my PhD student, John MacDonald, with his computer construction. And there we're looking from the sanctuary, we're looking at the West Kennet Palisades, an enormous double enclosure of oak timbers, bigger than the Avebury Henge. And they, look, you see that there? That's the chalk top of Silbury Hill. John has put it into the computer simulation, and it's peeping above Waden Hill, and that's just the bit that you see. And here is a plan diagram of the West Kennet Palisades. And here's the double structure here. That's called enclosure 2. This is called enclosure 1. And here we have these outline fence lines with smaller circular structures here. And this is an avenue approach of oak, not stone, an avenue approach of oak as you're walking towards enclosure 2, going through that tiny little doorway there, opening in the Palisades. And as you walk inside, there are these tiny further enclosures at the southeast end of a very elongated shaped enclosure 2. And the axis of that oval points towards Silbury Hill. So it's referencing Silbury Hill. Whereas this double enclosure here, it's got 2 circles of oak, so that once you go in that enclosure, you cannot see Silbury Hill at all. In fact, you won't see much at all. But look what's very unusual about it. The River Kennet rose right through the middle of enclosure 1. And when the archaeologists comment upon this, they say, we haven't got a clue why on earth would you build somewhere like a settlement with a river running through the middle of it? Well, the answer's obvious. It wasn't a settlement. This has to be a ritual enclosure in which water, flowing water, notice, running right through the structure, that flowing water must have been essential for whatever rituals were conducted inside that enclosure. So that's the West Kennet Palisades. And here, this is a lovely piece of work done by a local man called Stephen Marshall. And he's written a book, I recommend it. In fact, I should put it on that list, in which he shows what the waterscape would have been like during the Neolithic. Here's Silbury Hill, which would have had a moat all around it. But you see these highlighted white dots, circles that Stephen's put in there. These are all springs. This area is drenched with springs. Now, this is chalk country. It's very unusual to find water in chalk country. And it's all here because the local geology is very special. 30 feet below the land surface, there's a layer of clay marl, which stops or slows the descent of the water table during these summer months. And because it does this, it means that during the year, there'll be springs, and all of these springs are feeding the River Kennet, and they flow. You can see the outline in red. That's the West Kennet Palisades. They feed the River Kennet as it runs through enclosure 1 of the West Kennet Palisades. More than that, the North Kennet Springs here, they constitute part of the West Kennet Avenue. There's a gap in the West Kennet Avenue here, and this gap is filled by this brook, which is fed by the North Kennet Springs. The archaeologists could find no stones for the West Kennet Avenue just here, and the stones re-emerge in this position and go up there to the sanctuary. But the route to the sanctuary is partially through a marsh or through a brook from the North Kennet Springs. And this brook will either lead you to the sanctuary or it will lead you to the West Kennet Palisades, just there. Okay, I'm now going to show you what you see of Silbury Hill. And these are the prescribed views by the monument builders. And this photograph is taken from me standing at Fox Covert. And there you can see Silbury Hill. I must say, I've put the zoom on my camera here. It actually looks further away than that, but it would be difficult for you to see it if I took a normal non-zoomed photograph of it. But notice the background horizon and then the top terrace of Silbury Hill is peeping above the background horizon. Now we're looking to the east, okay? We're looking to the east, and there would have been here a white terrace gleaming just above the east horizon. Now, there we go. I'm focusing on it for you to see. And that's the first view that you will see of Silbury Hill walking from Fox Covert. You then carry walking along Beckhampton Avenue. We then have the River Winterbourne to cross. Well, it was a rainy old day in autumn when I did this bit of field work for this photograph. But here we see Silbury Hill again. But notice, can you see faintly, that's the background horizon. And the top of Silbury Hill is exactly in line with the background horizon, exactly in line. And now we're looking to the south, okay? We're looking to the south, and now we see Silbury Hill again. And we see, and the moment we see it again, in line with the background horizon, we are crossing the River Winterbourne. This would have been the center of the flowing river during the Neolithic. Now we carry on walking, and now we're in the center of the southern inner circle of the Avebury Henge. Here's the trees that we saw from the other end of the West Kennet Avenue when we were looking. And now there is Silbury Hill, just its top terrace, peeking through above the outline of, this is Waden Hill, the northern end of Waden Hill. And now we can see Silbury Hill pointing just above. And that would have been a glimmering piece of white chalk sitting above the horizon there. So you don't see the whole of Silbury Hill, You just see this top terrace again. And now I'm at the sanctuary, which is this complex arrangement of wood and stone in a multiple circle. And I'm standing in this pretty much close to the center of the sanctuary. And now I'm looking at Silbury Hill again, and here it is again. And look, again, it's exactly in line with the background horizon. In fact, what it does very cleverly is it fills a notch in the background horizon, and they've placed the top terrace there, so it completes the line to the left of the notch and the line to the right of the notch. And it looks like it's continuing the line of the background horizon. It's in line with the background horizon. And now here we go. Here's the West Kennet Avenue. I've put it in black parallel lines there. Then there's a break in the West Kennet Avenue, and we've got the brook of the North Kennet Springs. And then the avenue recommences after going through the North Kennet Springs, and it leads up to the sanctuary, which was the previous picture that I just showed you with. Here is the West Kennet Palisades enclosure 1, and here is West Kennet Palisades enclosure 2. And these are from these different views, we will or will not. Here we'll see Silbury Hill. Then we go into enclosure 1, we will not be able to see Silbury Hill. And then we go into enclosure 2, and then yes, we will see enclosure 2. And here it is. This is again John MacDonald's recreation. I'm standing in the middle of one of the inner structures in enclosure 2. And look, we can see Silbury Hill again. And it's that cropped terrace there of Silbury Hill peeping above the northwestern end of enclosure 2. So to sum up the views, not sum up the talk, to sum up the views, here we were at Fox Covert, and we could see Silbury Hill on the east horizon, on the eastern horizon. Then we get to the River Winterbourne. Now we see Silbury Hill on the southern horizon. Then we get into the Avebury Circle, and we see Silbury Hill again on the south, although at a slightly different angle. Then we get to the sanctuary, and we see Silbury Hill to the west on the horizon. And then we get into enclosure 2 of the West Kennet Palisades, and we can see again Silbury Hill on the West Kennet, on the western horizon, but again at a slightly different angle. Okay, we're now looking at the map of the Ivory Monuments, which we should now all be familiar with. And sorry, hold on, I'm there. There we go, we're back to where I want to be. And here we've got the positions, the 5 places that you can see a view of Silbury Hill. Now remember, I'm testing this model of the monuments in contrast to the theory for the origins of culture, which is where we began in that debate in 1991 in the Socialist Workers' Party, where I was arguing that hunter-gatherers of the Paleolithic were led by women supported by their brothers in matrilineal clans, and they organised their rituals of on-off hunting and on-off marriage according to the phases of the moon. This is where I began all of this research. And I made a hunch, a guess, that by the time we got to the Neolithic, where hunting and gathering alone was not a viable survival strategy, then the hunch that I had, the guess that I had, was that Stonehenge and Avebury type monuments would give us a clue to when and how and why that hunter-gatherer system collapsed, and how women's social and political and sexual status would have been undermined by the collapse of the matrilineal clans. That was my guess. And I think that that guess was well established by the properties that we find at Stonehenge and Avebury. Because when we start on the Avebury monuments, quite unlike the Stonehenge monuments, and we're looking from the Fox Covert in position 1, we can see the top of Silbury Hill in the east, and it is 5 degrees north of east when we're looking at Silbury Hill top terrace. And then when we get to the River Winterbourne, it's called the Bray Street Bridge now, and we look and we see the top of Silbury Hill, it's 77 degrees south of east in the way in which it is aligned, that the alignment that we see. And when we're in the southern inner circle, it is 80 degrees south of west. When we get to the sanctuary, there it is 16 degrees north of west. And when we get to the West Kennet Palisades, we can see then it is 30 degrees north of west. Now, look, remember what we're looking at. We're looking at a sliver of chalk. My argument is this, that this sliver of chalk represents crescent moon. And when you see crescent moon, which is what a sliver of chalk looks like, the top of Silbury Hill, and you're looking at it on the eastern horizon, there is only one time, if you understand the moon, and of course most of us have lost our connection with the sky. As I pointed out, I knew no astronomy when I started this research. That in fact was an enormous benefit, because most of the people I talk to in science, they're either engineers or astronomers. And they learnt their astronomy through modern astronomy. Well, I didn't. I learned astronomy from John North, and I learned astronomy by trying to visualize what it would have been like living in the Neolithic when you thought the Earth was flat. not a sphere, not a globe, but their understanding of the cosmos would have been that there's a flat Earth that we live on, and underneath was the underworld, and above that was the sky, and that the cosmos was divided roughly into these three domains. And the magic of the movements of the sun and the moon, when they descend in the west and then re-emerge at sunrise or moonrise in the east, that this magic was that these things, the sun, the moon, and the stars, travelled through the underworld and then emerged from the underworld on the eastern horizon. That's how they would have understood what was happening in the sky between day and night. Well, when we're looking at Fox Covert and we're looking at a sliver of chalk on the eastern horizon, then absolutely clearly that is a copy of the moon, crescent moon, when we see it on the east horizon. Now, the thing is, you only see on the east horizon, you only see the moon as a crescent when it is waning crescent moon. That's the only time you see a crescent on the eastern horizon of the moon. Now, waning crescent moon rises just before sunrise. And then when the sun comes up, the light of the sun blots out any visibility for waning crescent moon. It disappears in the sky. But then as waning crescent moon gets closer and closer to the sun, it then disappears, and we're in the period 2 to 3 days of dark moon. So waning crescent moon has been constructed. These builders have built a virtual moon. Silbury Hill is serving the purpose of being a moon that they can see on the eastern horizon. So no matter what the sky conditions, they've constructed a model of the moon on this first position when it is waning crescent moon. And then when we get to the Bray Street Bridge and the crossing of the River Winterbourne, if you recall, there the view of the moon was in line with the background horizon. Well, if the moon is in line with the background horizon, then that means the moon has set. It is below the horizon. Now, if you're walking along this avenue and you're a young man about to be initiated into the secrets of this culture, of this society, and if you're already worked out by the way you were at Fox Covert that you were seeing the moon on the eastern horizon and it was a waning crescent moon, which you see just before dark moon, then by the time you get to the River Winterbourne and you've crossed a river, remember, you're crossing a river. In the Greek myths, is the river Styx that you cross before you enter the underworld. When you pay the ferryman his small silver coin, which of course represents the moon, when you cross across the river Styx in Greek myth, you're entering the underworld. Well, here we've got the view of Silbury Hill, and its top level, flat top is in line with the background horizon, then that can only mean that the moon has now set. It is under the horizon. But if you can see the moon when it has set, where are you? You are in the underworld. If you can see the moon when it's set, there's only one place you can see the moon when it is set, and that is in the actual underworld. So what they've done is they've created an on-off image of Silbury Hill where you must construct the route that you're taking as a virtual underworld. You are now thinking quite differently. I am journeying through the underworld. And then we get to the southern inner circle, and now we see Silbury Hill, but now it's 80 degrees south of west. The moon on this earth never can be seen 80 degrees south of west. If it is 80 degrees south of west, then this can only mean that the moon itself is traveling through the underworld, and we can see the moon when it is traveling through the underworld. Therefore, it's reconfirmed by this view that we've got of the moon in this extreme position, never seen on this earth, that they've constructed it in such a way that now we also are traveling in the underworld alongside the moon, which is traveling through the underworld. And then we walk along West Kennet Avenue, and we get to the sanctuary, and now we see the moon on the western horizon. It's 16 degrees north of west. Now, when do you see the moon as a crescent moon? When it is on the western horizon. But remember, Silbury Hill now is again seen in line with the background horizon. Well, the only ever time you see a crescent moon on the western horizon is when it is waxing crescent moon, not waning crescent moon. Waxing crescent moon happens just after the sun has set. Then the moon that is just to the left of the sun is now going to be a waxing crescent moon, a growing crescent moon. But this is one which is in line with the background horizon, and therefore it is in line, it is therefore in the underworld. So therefore, again, it's an underworld representation of the moon. And then when we've left the sanctuary, we can then go to the West Kennet Palisades, and now we see the moon, and it's 30 degrees north of west. Well, if you recall, 30 degrees north of west is the extreme northern minor limit of the setting moon during the minor standstill of the moon. And there we can see the moon cropped top peeping above the oak palisade of enclosure number 2. Okay, now look at all of these movements. Okay, these are the movements as we are going clockwise around the Ivory Monuments, and so we see the moon and its different aspects: waning moon, then crescent moon in the underworld, and then waxing moon in the underworld. And now we see the waxing crescent moon peeping above enclosure 2 of the West Kennet Palisades. This is, as we are walking around the monuments in a clockwise direction, the moon is being represented traveling through the underworld from the east to the west. Now, think about this very carefully. When you last see the sun at night, it sets on the western horizon. And then if we're all lucky, in the morning, the sun rises on the eastern horizon. Well, if you believe in a flat earth, then you must conclude that the sun has set on the western horizon, it emerges on the eastern horizon, and therefore it has travelled through the underworld from the west to the east. Right, now think about the moon. When's the last time that you see the moon just before dark moon? Well, you see it as waning crescent moon on the eastern horizon. Well, then when do you next see the moon after dark moon? Well, it's waxing crescent moon, which you only see on the western horizon. Well, hang on a minute. The last time you see the moon on the eastern horizon is waning crescent, and then the next time you see it is waxing crescent on the western horizon. That means the moon travels through the underworld, not from west to east, which is what the sun does, but the moon travels through the underworld from east to west, in the opposite direction to the sun. This therefore completes the knowledge that everyone would have had during the Neolithic. We have forgotten that knowledge, but the people in the past they would have understood that they've been seeing the moon and they have been traveling through the underworld, and they have been journeying through the underworld from west to east, while the moon is journeying through the underworld from east to west. This is an amazing device that the monument builders have constructed, but it gets even more complicated, because remember what we found from Morrison, the Royal Greenwich Observatory astronomer, that when we have alignments on the moon, the alignments on the moon give us the reverse phase moons, which are 2.2 days later when they return on the horizon. They're 2 days earlier versions of the moon. So on an alignment like we've got at the West Kennet Palisades in enclosure 2, the moons that will emerge on the horizon, returning to these horizon positions, will be moon phases that go backwards, not forwards. And that these will be the moons that will be seen in the West Kennet Palisades. So now, what do we say? My argument is that these routes through this virtual underworld were for the senior men in these cultures to take young men to be initiated into the secrets of how they have constructed these monuments as places for elite, wealthy, cattle-rich men to organize rituals to inculcate young men into the secrets of their knowledge of what's happening in the sky. And the main secret was to make sure that you understood that you have a different sort of moon to the moon of the hunter-gatherers that came before you, that respected the moon as you see it in the sky, not as you see it through a monument alignment. The way in which our hunter-gatherer forebears saw the moon was the moon that everyone sees in the sky when full moon takes place after dark moon. But not these people. The people who built the Avebury monuments are cattle herders, and cattle herders are very, very different from hunter-gatherers, and that therefore the way they would have seen the moon is a moon that happens every 9 or 19 years, a moon that goes backwards, a moon that synchronizes the phases of the dark moon with the winter solstice and the summer solstice, and therefore they've displaced the monthly moon with a 19 or 9-year alternating moon that synchronizes with the solstices. So if you walk around the monuments in a clockwise direction, you will see a spread out version of the moon over a 9 to 10-year period that follows the normal sequences of the moon from dark moon to full moon. But when you go anti-clockwise, the reverse around the monuments, which is now, if you just change direction and go back around the monuments in an anti-clockwise direction, then you will see the moon going back in its reverse phases. Whereas before you saw it in its normal phases, now we see it in its reverse phases. And this would have been the secret cult knowledge of these people who were running these rituals. Now, what's the implications of all of this? This young woman here with her child belongs to the group called the Henge. And you'll notice that they have red ochre on them. And the way they run their rituals is as collective women-led rituals synchronized with the phases of the moon. And here we have another group. These are called the Bavemba. Of course, it's in Africa that we can see the greatest conservatism in ritual, in which we can rediscover how hunter-gatherers would have used their knowledge of the moon and the sun to organize their rituals. And the Bavemba, the collective of women, organizes itself in this collective sense here. Here they're doing the Bavemba, it's the Python dance, and they're representing their collective sense through imagining themselves as this very powerful dragon-type creature. So they're building their solidarity through these sorts of dances in which animals such as pythons or virtual animals like dragons, serpents, magical serpents, this is a way of representing their collective strength. And here again, the Bavemba. Notice the way they link their arms like that, and it's like a Mexican wave in which it goes up and down, undulating, and the Bavemba are famous for their Python dance. Now, these are those who still hung on to their hunter-gatherer rituals. And here we have the initiation of the young women, in which senior women are organising their ritual, and they're laying down together in this linked way, doing the Python initiation ritual for Bovember. Now we're turning to Stonehenge. At Stonehenge, the earliest deposition around the structure of Stonehenge is of very, very large cattle. And here we've got the jaw of an enormous cattle, possibly a wild cattle, possibly an auroch. And these bones are 500 years older than the earliest version of Stonehenge. Therefore, they were curated bones in which they give enormous respect to their cattle by placing them in their most prestigious monuments. Here we've got a map of Central Africa. And in Africa, we have the Zezetse flybelt. Cattle cannot be domesticated, cannot be herded through the Zezetse flybelt. And amongst that area in Central Africa, there can be no cattle herding. And these tend to be matrilineal cultures in which women have accorded relatively high status, where outside the Zezetse flybelt, on the northern edge and on the southern edge, there you can have cattle, and these are overwhelmingly patrilineal cultures in which women do not have such a high status. And therefore, when we think about Stonehenge and we think about Avebury, you have to think in terms of the people who build these monuments are cattle herders, and cattle herders are organised quite differently from hunter-gatherers. Here we have the Dinka culture, and this woman here, surrounded by her relatives, is wearing this waistcoat, and that waistcoat tells you how many cattle they will receive in exchange for offering this young woman as a wife to a man who has cattle. So therefore there's barter going on in the way in which any kin group will only concede one of their members to be a wife to another group on condition that cattle are exchanged. And then in return for those receiving those cattle, they will then themselves be able, her brothers will be able themselves to purchase a wife for themselves. So notice now the status of women is quite different. Now women are being bartered between groups according to the amount of cattle that can be exchanged between groups. And here we have a Dinka man, and his waistcoat says how many cattle he has at his disposal. So there's this gross display of cattle wealth between them. And therefore, in this culture, if a woman doesn't like her husband in a cattle herding culture, and if she decides that she wants to end the marriage, then her kin will say to her, well, why? Why do you want to end the marriage? Because we've already got the cattle for you. And if you leave that man, we'll have to return that cattle. So no, you put up with that man. Otherwise, we're going to have to return the cattle. And then your brother will never be able to have a wife. And so therefore, in these cultures, women are isolated in cattle herding cultures, whereas in hunting cultures, it's in the interest of the brothers of a woman to make sure that she is married to an effective hunter, because that effective hunter who is husband to his sister is going to be bringing hunted game into their matrilineal kin group, whereas the man as a brother has to give hunted game animal to his wife who is in another kin group. So now in a hunting culture, it's in the interest of a man who is a brother to support his wife in good marital relations, whereas in a cattle herding culture, for a brother who has a sister, it's in his interest to make sure that his sister is locked in a marriage for which he has received cattle to give away his sister to another man in another group. Okay, now, therefore, what I've been trying to argue now with that last bit of economics of the anthropology of hunting compared to the anthropology of cattle herding is that the people who built Stonehenge and Avebury were cattle herders. They had to undermine the lunar logic to rituals. The lunar logic to rituals had been developed by hunter-gatherers. Once you switch to cattle herding, and that happened in Britain 4000 BC, a monument building started 3500 BC in Britain during the Neolithic. These are the people who had switched and left hunter-gathering and were cattle herders. And in these cultures, they had to undermine the old lunar logic. And one way of doing that was to build monuments that reversed lunar phases, that spread lunar phases according to the sun's movements, not the moon's movements, and then extended the range of the rituals, not to monthly rituals, but 9 or 10-year rituals or 19-year rituals. Therefore, Stonehenge and Avebury, the two monument complexes, are part of a counter-revolution, a reversal in history. And the main reversal was paid, the consequences of this reversal were paid by a massive deterioration in the social status of women and the emergence for the first time of elite cattle wealthy men who were competing amongst themselves for how much cattle they themselves owned. And therefore, not just women lost in social status, but those men who couldn't become wealthy cattle owners, those men also had a decline in their status. And it is out of the oppression of women that we then find social classes emerge for the first time. The Neolithic is the Neolithic counter-revolution. It's not the Neolithic revolution, it's the Neolithic counter-revolution against the egalitarian hunting cultures that came before. Thank you very much. That's the end of the talk.
I don't know about you, but I'm exhausted listening to Lionel Sims for an hour and a half. I'm really glad I recorded that, friends, because I wouldn't be capable of answering your questions. I've seen some lovely ones, lovely questions coming up, and we'll turn to them unless some people would like to chip in straight away.
Perhaps if I can just explain to people how this section of the meeting is going to run. For those of you who missed the beginning, my name is Sarah Miller and I'm chairing the meeting today. So as Lionel said, there's a couple of ways to participate. One is to use the chat facility to post a question or make a short point. Or alternatively, you can raise your virtual hand, which you do by clicking on the participants icon at the bottom of the screen and clicking on your little virtual hand symbol. So if anyone wants to indicate to speak in that way, then I will call you, and we're going to restrict the amount of time people have so that we get as many people in the discussion as possible. Okay, so not seeing anyone as yet with their virtual hand raised, but just to recap on the questions that were posted in the chat. There was a number of questions. One was about, I'm just trying to get up to the question about about whether or not the river could represent the Milky Way, and someone making a point that springs are associated with the Milky Way too. And then other questions are, why just senior men and younger men? Why not women too? If this was a matriarchal society, the moon has traditionally been associated with women. And then another question from what role do women have in these decisions of marriage exchanges? Rather than getting Lionel to come back and forth, we're going to ask Lionel to come back at the end of the discussion. So Frank Prendergast has raised his hand. So Ashok, if you can unmute Frank, and Frank, yeah, go ahead. I think you're unmuted now.
Okay, testing 1, 2.
Yep, we can hear you. Yep.
You got me. Congratulations, Nigel. A real pleasure to be with you today. And I've got a quick question insofar as the recent discovery at Durrington of those massive pits, which in a sense concentrically surround the great monument itself. The authors of that paper strongly suggest the use of a tally system of counting as a way of keeping the evenness of the pacing to get those pits more or less conform to a near perfect circle. There's lots of deviations in it. But my question then is, insofar as much of your talk is predicated on counting and the tally keeping and the tracking of celestial bodies and their movements. What are your general thoughts on prehistoric people in the Neolithic using a method of counting which we don't know about?
Okay, thanks, Frank.
Thanks.
Sarah, you want me to come back after all the questions?
Well, we haven't got any more questions at the moment, so perhaps if you do want to come back straight away on those ones that have been asked, that'd be great.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Frank, many thanks. Yes, it's been, most of you won't be aware that there's been an amazing discovery at Stonehenge in the last week, in which Vince Gaffney and his Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes team have found enormous pits in a great big semicircle surrounding Durrington walls, which is the wooden half of the Stonehenge monument complex. These pits are 20 meters in diameter, circular top, and something like 5 to 10 meters deep, enormous pits. And something like 20 or so of them have been found in an incomplete circle. They point out that residential development and the army barracks nearby have precluded following the line of the existing pits that have been found. So it's unsure how many pits there would have been in total. So therefore, constructing a tally system from the number of pits is prejudiced by the fact that we cannot complete the archaeology that we would like to complete to work out what number of pits there were. But Vince Gaffney undermines his own, if you read carefully, his long paper that was published a few days ago. He argues that within this circle of pits, they are integrated and centered around another structure called the Lark Hill Causewayed Enclosure, which itself was only discovered 2 or 3 years ago. And he, in my view, failed to saturate the details of the pit circles, because the Lark Hill Causewayed Enclosure is the pivot of this semicircle of pits. So I would suggest, Frank, that the way forward is to interrogate very, very carefully the properties of the Lark Hill Causewayed Enclosure, which is one of the structures within that semicircle of pits. And Vince Gaffney weakens his own research by not elaborating the details of the Lark Hill Enclosure. So I think that's a way forward. There's a lot of work to be done to be able to check all of this out. I predict that if there was going to be a complete circle, it would be 29 or 30, but then I would say that, wouldn't I? But I'll stick my neck out and say it probably was something like that, but I don't know, and we need to check the details. Thanks, Frank. Good question.
Okay, so there's a couple more questions have been posed in the chat. Let me just. Is there a time when the waning crescent moon or waxing crescent moon, when the actual waning or waxing crescent lines up with, I'm not following this, lines up with actual waxing or waning crescent? I'm not following that very well, but maybe the person who asked that wants to stick their hand up if I didn't pose that properly. And another question from Gordon Jelly. Can you say some more on how structuralism helps us understand myths and fairy tales and provide supporting evidence of matriarchal societies?
Who asked this question?
That's Gordon Jelly.
Gordon. Lovely, Gordon.
And then another one from Ivan Tacey. Question point, I'm not sure that hunter-gatherers calculate marriages in the ways you suggested, i.e. on hunters' success. On Batex at least, sharing rules seem to override any benefits of being a great hunter, i.e. people put up with crap hunters as food is and great hunters don't get any social benefits or prestige. Any comments?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, do you want to come back on any of those points at the moment.
Yeah, lovely. Ivan, hello, Ivan. Lovely, thank you. I would say, Ivan, that your point confirms my point, because sharing differs according to local circumstances. And so sharing is just another way of making sure that a man is generous and shares whatever wealth or potential he has for supporting others around him. This is another way of doing, where in a culture where hunting is important as a source of nutrition, then of course it's about sharing meat. So sharing is just a more general way of saying something which would vary all around the globe according to how locally we've all had to adapt to the local circumstances. And therefore, when I'm talking about hunter-gathering, of course, it's a model. I'm simplifying the picture because I'm talking about the Paleolithic. And the main way for a man to share in the Paleolithic with his affines, with his marital group, the group that he's married into, the main way that a man would share them is through sacrificing hunted meat. So I think we're not at odds there, Ivan. I think we're on the same track. Sarah, would you like me to go on to fairy tales?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
Gordon, that is lovely. It's a whole other talk, isn't it, about fairy tales and structuralism? It's a whole other talk, but an amazing confirmation or test of this theory of Stonehenge and Avebury. Astonishingly, an amazing test is looking at fairy tales and myth all around the world. And structuralism is now out of favour in academia. The academics don't like it very much, but that's too bad because the method works beautifully. And every fairy tale, every myth is built around the same structure. And basically, and Vladimir Prop, the Russian, in 1928, showed this very, very clearly. And he talked about a lost European civilization. He argued that all of the fairy tales of Europe are all part of one body of knowledge of a lost civilization that once was a European civilization. And he shows that fairy tales are organized in this way. You start in this world, you journey to another world to battle with dragons and fiendish beings to get the treasure, which is usually a beautiful bride, potentially. And then you take this bride from the underworld, if you're lucky, and you get back to this world, and then they live happily ever after. That's the normal structure to every fairy tale in Europe. Stacey knows this through telling fairy tales and myth as a way to tell a story. So therefore, structuralism provides this understanding that you break down fairy tales according to their bits. And when you look at all of these bits, they all follow a universal logic, a logic that is true to fairy tales and to myths. And this logic is the same as at Stonehenge and Avebury, where you leave one world and you travel along the avenues and you go through an underworld. And if you're lucky, because some of them didn't come back, at the Ivory Monuments, young men died during the rituals that took place. They're buried at the base of stones. I didn't emphasize this because it's a bit disturbing for people. That human sacrifice took place at Avebury and at Stonehenge. Some of them didn't come back. They stayed in the underworld. And then if you're lucky, you're fully initiated, and then you come out of these monuments, and then you're a member of the senior men who are the cattle owners in this culture. So therefore, by the time of monument building, my argument is it's no longer matrilineal, it's patrilineal. It's no longer matriarchal, it's patriarchal. That's why I said it's a counter-revolution. It begins with women being oppressed, and then once women are oppressed, then the division amongst men is accelerated, and then you get senior men compared to inferior men, and these inferior men are equated with women. And that's the way class first emerges. That is oppressed women, oppressed by men. So yeah, fairy tales, another talk. Perhaps I'll do that if I'm invited back again. Perhaps I'll do that at Christmas, at the winter solstice. And we'll do another, if you want one. If you can put up with me for another hour and a half, we'll do fairy tales at Christmas, okay?
That's a fantastic promise, Lionel. That's really definitely going to hold you to that one. There's some really fascinating questions coming through on the chat. Just want to raise one in particular, I think, some really interesting from Carmen. Is there a theory as to why the women's demise from playing a major role in society was challenged by the women themselves? Did they try and rebel this major shift for them? And then a quick question about the name of the author of the fairy tale book. And another one there about the landscape. Coming back to Avebury, and just want to just chip in a point myself there, which is that if anyone actually hasn't been to the Ivory Monuments themselves, I really, really urge you to go, because it's just absolutely amazing to see, see these monuments. And so when the question was, what do you think the landscape actually looked like during this time? Was it mainly wooded, and does that make any difference to the line of sight? And then about the question, another question about the white terrace at Silbury Hill, and whether it did line up with the actual waning and waxing crescent moon, and if so, when. Okay, and so Stacey and Carlos has indicated to speak. If Ashok, if you can unmute Stacey and Carlos. I don't know which is Stacey and Carlos, but if you can.
Sorry, I think Lucian's first. Yeah.
Sorry?
Lucian's first.
Oh, sorry, but can you just call Stacey and Carlos if you if that's okay. Just I think I can unmute them. I think actually, Ashok, can you unmute Stacey and Carlos?
I can't mute. Won't do it.
Can't do it. Okay.
Okay, take a question.
Yeah, okay, Lionel, while we're trying to sort that out about trying to unmute people, can you come back on those questions that were in the chat? That'll be
Sure. Let's take the first one. I think it was from Carmen. Did women oppose this subjection that took place in the shift from hunting to cattle herding? I'm sure they did. But of course, prehistory is prehistory. I'm sure there were terrible, terrible disputes about this. And in fact, in the Greek myths, if you read Robert Graves on the Greek myths, all of the Greek myths are of a terrifying battles that took place over millennia between different men and different interests. And most of these battles are all about the treatment of women and the attempts of women to fight back against patriarchal men. And of course, the patriarchal men eventually won with Zeus, the high patriarch of the Apollonian gods. So therefore, the answer to the question is yes, of course they fought back. They fought back, and it was a terrible centuries and centuries and thousands of years of battles. If I would locate the beginning of this downward collapse of the hunting cultures, I would date it right back to the Solutrean, right back to 22,000 years ago, because that's the time when in Europe the big game animals were becoming extinct, and this made vulnerable the strategy of hunter-gatherers to be able to survive from hunting alone. So this is thousands of years of reaction, but I'm saying the culmination of all of this is the Neolithic with monument building, because that's the decisive moment when the patriarchs took control of the whole of the culture and nothing else would be tolerated. So this is the final culmination of something that's taken thousands of years. So yeah, I'm sure women did fight back. Of course they did. And of course they're still doing it.
Very much so, yes. Okay, so I think we've managed to unmute Stacey and Carlos now, so you can speak.
Thank you.
We have two questions. Sorry, but Carlos is going first.
It's just a quick one, Lionel. I just wondered, do you think, because the two monuments are seen to have encoded in them awareness of the other's apparent need for, well, when they journey to the underworld for ritual purpose. Do you think that there were this is indicative of two geographically separated moieties existing, or moieties that maybe is intertwined and were more based perhaps on alternating life history rituals, like coming of ages every 9 years? Because an 18-year life cycle history thing is quite big, isn't it? You know?
Yeah.
I don't know, that's...
Carlos, I agree with you. There was definitely an alternation and a sharing and a competitive dynamic between the Stonehenge group and the Avebury group. There was definitely a competitive dynamic, and it was throughout emulating the others. it wasn't about out-fighting the others. It's not until you get into the Middle Bronze Age that you're getting the archaeology showing up weapons of war. It's not until the Bronze Age. In the Neolithic, they're trying to out-emulate through monument construction the other group down the road. So yes.
So you think they're geographically separate entities, and they're
Yes.
not
They're separate. Yes.
They're not one community's way of just having alternating life
No.
rituals at both places.
No, they're separate groups. And John North has a long discussion on this in his book, and he gives a lot of supporting evidence to show that they're competing different groups. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
My question is, kind of like, it goes into your point about them being in competition. When you're doing the walk and you're seeing the moon and you're changing, you're going, isn't it that sort of like stopping time? Not just stopping time, that's not just noticing that, look, time is standing still, but actually you are actually reversing time. You're doing that.
The sun.
Good.
Yeah, so it's like it's a more powerful sort of thing.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Fine, isn't it?
Yeah, I completely agree. You are becoming the vector for change. Your embodied presence is making the change happen. And the implication behind that is a fearfulness. If we want to go into the anthropology of it, the implication is that they have stopped natural alternation by making women secluded within one marriage for perpetuity. And therefore, because they've stopped natural alternation, they have to make these movements around the monument to recreate time to carry on changing. I completely agree. But when I give my talks and I write my papers, I don't usually go this far because I know I'm going to lose my audience who are astronomers. And the astronomers, whenever I talk anthropology, it's very, very difficult to non-anthropologists. But I completely agree with what you've just said. That's exactly what's going on in my view. They have a fearfulness that if they didn't walk around these monuments, the sky would collapse, time would stop. That was the sense that they had. I agree. Thank you, Stacey.
Okay, so just reading out some of the questions and contributions that have come out in the chat. Would you consider Silbury Hill to represent a captured moon? And a point from Martin Edwards. Viking mythology includes two tribes of gods, one clearly hunter-gatherer, Vanir, and the other pastoral, Aesir. This is repeated in Celtic mythology and maybe elsewhere. And yeah, is there a question from Idoa? Is there a difference in social structure between semi-nomadic pastoral cultures, matrilineality still in some patriarchies, and intense cattle herding? Yeah, that's the kind of questions so far in the chat.
Okay. I didn't quite catch the last one, but I've still got some questions from the previous tranche.
Oh, yeah. Sure, yeah.
Was the landscape different at the time? Was it all wooded? Is this important? Yes, it is important. And the answer is no, the landscape was not different to what it is today, amazingly, because these people who built these monuments were cattle herders, and they didn't want forests, they wanted grass. They cleared the forests. So therefore, the landscape that you see today in Wiltshire, astonishingly, is the landscape created by these Neolithic cattle herders. So by about 4000 to 3000 BC, the forests generally were cleared. In fact, there'll be more forest now than there was then. So therefore, and this is important because in terms of the astronomy, if you've got tree cover, it changes the claims that you can possibly make about these alignments on the sun and the moon. But the point is, no, these are the people who made the modern landscape. The modern civilization, if that's what you want to call it, began with these monument builders. Another question was, does the White Terrace line up of Silbury Hill with any of the standstills? The answer to that is yes, it does in one place at Avebury, and that's when you're standing in enclosure 2. And I've just finished a paper on that very, very subject. So if you want to go into www.academia.edu/sims, you'll go in there and you'll see a paper there called Returning from the Underworld. And you'll see there that Silbury Hill, yes, it does line up with the Northern Minor Standstill, which leads to a very special problem, because there Silbury Hill is displayed as waxing crescent moon setting on the northern horizon, and it lines up with the Northern Minor Standstill, and that allows you to make a very unusual argument. But you have to refer to the paper. It's a bit too involved to go through now. But very good question. Thank you. Right now, the other bit, the comment on Celtic mythology and between the two families of gods, between hunter-gatherers and pastoralists. Fantastic observation. Exactly so. When we're dealing, especially in Northern Europe during the Neolithic, there is this struggle going on between the old way, the hunter-gatherer way, and the new way, which is the cattle-owning way. So there would have been enormous tensions amongst the men. As a man, how do you decide to treat your sister? There used to be on YouTube, there used to be a film, and it's just called Dinka with an exclamation mark, D-I-N-K-A, exclamation mark. If you can find it on YouTube, look at it. It has pictures of these men who are all cattle owners, and they're all sitting in a big group in a huddle, and they're working out who to sell their sister to, according to how many cattle are going to be offered in return for their sister. And then there is this heartbreaking interview with a young woman, and she's looking straight in the camera, and she's saying, "They never ask us who we love." And she's in tears, looking in the camera. This is a cattle-earning culture. They are not matriarchal. Yes, now, don't get me wrong, some will be more harsh than others. Don't get me wrong. And some will be less. For example, the Himba have cattle, but they're not as harsh, excuse me, as the Dinka. The Dinka are quite clear that it's about the amount of cattle. I know this because I have an ex-student of mine, Patsy O'Hagan. She's worked in Africa in the southern Sudan, and she worked amongst the Dinka. And I rung her up and I says, "Patsy, how are marital disputes settled amongst the Dinka?" And she looked, and on the phone, she just says to me, "Oh, it's quite simple, Lionel. They get out their Kalashnikovs. That's how they settle marital disputes, because if the cattle are not returned, if a wife leaves her husband, then it's war." This is a theory of warring. This is how wars begin. It's about the competition over cattle wealth. So to understand the Neolithic monuments, it's not just about looking at the stars and saying the Milky Way, that's what the River Kennet, I think it's a lovely idea to call the River Kennet the Milky Way. These are all beautiful, poetic insights. But be clear, we are dealing with cattle herders, and cattle herders, it's about wealth. It's about cattle wealth, and it's a real competition. It's a real war that's going on. So the theory that you've got about the sky is going to be a theory that helps you with your cattle wealth. So it's going to be very straightforward and very basic in that sense. I've run out of questions to answer.
Okay. I'm not sure if we've got all the ones in the chat. There's been some more comments on the chat, but mainly I think there's a big demand for the fairy tale talk.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yes,
that's lovely.
And someone's asked to share the link to the papers on the internet. I think that was up in the original title slide. But we'll have it that there'll also be at the end of the meeting and the talk. There's going to be a reading list which is going to be posted on screen. And just to say that the whole of this meeting will be up on YouTube at some point, so the discussion can continue. We're going to start to wrap up the meeting now. So really, I just want to say, Lionel, if you wanted to kind of say, oh, hang on, there's 5 new messages. Let me just see if there's people saying thank you very much for the meeting. And can the video be shared? Definitely, it will be shared. It will be put up on YouTube in its entirety. So Lionel, do you want to kind of come back to kind of conclude and to sum up, really?
My main thing is to say thank you to everyone, my friends and people who've helped to organise this. My daughter Danny, Pete, and Sarah, and Vicky, and Ashok, and hello and thank you to Zabi Otero and all my Basque friends. It's lovely that you've come and you've listened to it all. I hope to see you all sometime, hopefully. So I've very much enjoyed and seeing everyone reaggregate and reassemble in this way during these awful times. Sitting in the middle of a pandemic on a dying planet can get you down there and again, you know. So this way of just coming together is just fantastic because it makes a difference. That's the point. It makes a difference to how we experience things, and you can feel another possible future through little events like this. It's wonderful to have that sense and that experience. So it's great to see you all. And at the very, very last, I hope we see each other round about the winter solstice, where we'll be dealing with fairy tales. Okay, so keep in touch. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Lionel. That was absolutely fantastic. And I think Ashok is going to now put up the reading list if people want to read further about this.